And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, who I believe has some questions from the audience.
That's right, I do. Thanks. We got a couple of audience questions, some really good ones. So this first one is for everybody, and the question is, and I like this question because I have the same question myself. How do you know when you've researched enough, and enough is in quote marks? Or does your timeline determine when you're going to stop, or do you feel like, okay, I've got all the information I need? How do you know when, okay, I've got the information I need to get this book together?
I would say never, because the more once you actually get into writing it, the more you realize what you don't know. And there are days where you just find yourself going down a rabbit hole for a detail that you hadn't even considered before, because you want to make sure you get that part exactly right. Like was mentioned before, if you get one detail wrong, the reader is thrown off, and if they're familiar with the subject, the reader's thrown off for the whole book. They're turned off by it, so you want to make sure you get it right every time. So I'd say there's a point where you start writing, but the research really never ends.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I agree with John. I mean, my book's been out for 7 years now, and I'm still getting more and more information about the X15. I've been just recently upgrading my website and stuff. I used to have like 500 pictures on there. I'm now approaching 1,700 pictures. So yeah, it really never stops. But when it comes to writing a book, you know, you have to know when to stop, when you have enough to tell the story, or yeah, you'll never get it done. So yeah, thank you. Sorry, Jay. Yeah.
That's okay, Michelle. That was really interesting. You know, I've mentioned that there are some parallels with filmmaking, and in film school, one of my professors said something which has stuck with me all these years. He looked out at the class one day and he said, you know what? No project is ever finished. It is abandoned. And you need to keep that in mind, because you will never be finished. And I've heard these stories about the painter Degas, who would actually sell his paintings, and then he would knock at the doors of the people who had bought his paintings, you know, months or years later, wanting to come in and make changes to them. For me, it's been pretty intangible. I know I get to a point where I'm just sick of that subject. I've just had it. On my second book, I got deep into this Soviet thing called Lunokhod, and I can just remember going to bed a few times going, God, I've just had it with Lunokhod. I can't read another report or email about Lunokhod. I'm just so done with Lunokhod. And it's been like that a few times. There have been a few times where the schedule really demands it. I've tried to have this mentality of, I'm going to deliver a draft chapter to Colin at these specific intervals. And I've had it to the point where I have to cut myself off and say, you know what, I'm never going to turn this in on time unless I just cut the cord and move on. So that's been my own experience for what it's worth.
We should add too that we're not researching up to the point where we have enough for a book. We are researching the crap out of everything, and then we're winnowing down to the point where we have a book. If you read Andy Chaikin's A Man on the Moon, which, you know, there's a television series is based on, you can read that book, and he's probably the master in this genre, because you read that book and you realize he's dancing around subjects he knows to tell a well-crafted narrative to drive a story. And the storytelling is just as important as the research. It's pretty clear when you read his book, not in a pompous way, but just in a really well-crafted way. He knows way more than he's saying there. He's just cherry-picking the good stuff to take you through this. So it's almost the opposite of what you'd expect. You learn everything you can, and then you have to go through and say, I love this story, but it doesn't fit what we're trying to do with this. So therefore, it gets put to one side. Thankfully, it tends to come around in some other project another day, and it ends up seeing the light of day somewhere else.
Okay, I'll go next because unfortunately I have to go out to a meeting. But I find that I can finish a book, but this series continues what I want to write about. I'm glad about that because these are areas that I would have never touched myself. These are stories that are beyond, well, I live in Australia. for a start, geographically, it's impossible for me to sit down with a lot of these people, and particularly in the situation we're in at the moment, where flights to the USA and such are going to be 2 years away. So I'll finish my book, but then Jay will come along and write his book, and I think, wow, that's great, because that's one book I don't have to write. Michelle writes about the X-15. Wow, I know nothing about the X-15. So here's an extension of what I've written. And this is what the whole series is all about. It's a series of stories that people say should be told, but haven't been up until now. To meet some of these extraordinary people who have done these things is amazing. To share the memories with the participants in this Outward Odyssey series is amazing. I'm glad I've written what I've written. I've got nothing else that I really want to write about, but that doesn't mean to say that tomorrow morning I'm not going to wake up and think, wow, what about if I write that book? It happens. It happens to all of us. But these stories are extensions of what I've written about. I'm glad I've written what I've written. I've enjoyed the experience, but there are limitations to what I can write about and want to write about. And this series as a whole envelops all of that. I'm so glad that it's come about. As I said before, it's a legacy, and these people are all part of that legacy. And my sincere thanks, not only to them, but the University of Nebraska Press for putting up with us and publishing these works. It's been a totally awesome experience. And I'll say that in closing, I'm proud of all of you. Thank you.
I'll add, I was,
go ahead, David.
Part of a team one time that outlined their operating norms at the beginning of the project, and a lot of it was just standard operating procedure, sort of how we relate to each other. But the last norm, the last rule, was pledge to do imperfect work. And the idea there was we could polish forever, but if we polish forever, we'll never deliver. And you will never get to a point where another day on your book wouldn't make it a better book. The reality is at some point you just kind of have to pencils down. Like Francis talked about, you're going to know more than you include, and that's always going to be true. When we were writing Homesteading Space, the goal was, we wanted this history preserved. We wanted 50 years from now, if somebody wants to know something about Skylab, here is a place that they can turn to find that out. The flip side of that, though, the kind of the curse that goes with that is, there are stories that aren't in the book. There are stories I continue to hear that, oh man, if I had known that, I would have put that in the book. And for each of those stories, I was born 2 years after the first crew launched to Skylab. I'm younger than the people who flew on Skylab. I'm younger than the people who were involved in Skylab. Odds are I will outlive everybody that touched Skylab, and I'll carry those stories forward. But some of those stories that I heard, that I learned, that I never put, that we didn't put in Homesteading, there's a non-zero chance that those disappear when I die, and that's kind of it's an interesting burden to carry. But you've heard everybody here talking tonight about during the course of their projects, during the course of their books. They've talked about not only the people they talked to, but the people who laid eyes on the manuscript, right? The people who, either the co-authors or the editors or the experts or whoever, the wife, the whoever that laid eyes on that manuscript. And that can be such a valuable tool for that, because it can be hard to let go. It can be hard to be impartial when it's your baby, and having those other eyes that can say, step away from the manuscript, put the keyboard down, can be a very valuable thing. I was very blessed to be working on a book about Skylab with people who were on Skylab, and at the point where they said, yeah, we've told the story, okay, you've told the story.